I've been collecting vintage computers and consoles now for quite a few years, although to be honest with you, the most of that collection, it's all machines from the late 80s into the early 90s, i.e. those machines from my youth. This machine though, the Prinztronic Tournament VC6000, this thing actually hails from before my time. This thing, as far as I can tell, is from the very late 70s. I picked this up from eBay quite a while ago, spares or repairs, and that's because supposedly untested, there's no power supply with it. That's something we need to try and figure out. But I bought it, stuck it on the shelf, and haven't really done anything with it. So this seems like as good a time as any. The box is in pretty rough condition. Let's just hope the machine inside isn't that bad. So this box is pretty rough, isn't it? Just about being held together with some really old masking tape. The Prinztronic Tournament VC6000 Video Computer TV Home Entertainment Center. Cartridge system provides hundreds of game options. I assume that's meant to say real color system, realistic sound effects, simple plug-in to aerial socket of most UHF TVs. Well, if we can manage to get the machine to power on, if we can get it to make some noises, what we're going to do instead of relying on an RF output, we're going to try and do a composite mod of this. Images do not reflect in-game footage. Cartridge system provides hundreds of game options, and it was very nice of them to stick the educational looking pictures on here. So obviously the kids could convince their parents that this isn't just for games, we can use this for schoolwork too. But what's in the box? Well, not a lot, unfortunately. All of the original internal packaging is missing. We do have the machine itself though, and one game. Now the eagle-eyed will probably pick out that this suggests this is for an Acetronic microprocessor system, and our machine, well, that's Prinztronic. So how could this possibly be compatible? Well, if I could draw your attention to the small print, suitable for the Acetronic, the Radofin 1292, and the Prinztronic microprocessor systems. And that is because all three of these, well, that one in the middle there, the Radofin 1292, are Prinztronic here, and the Acetronic, well, those two are a copy of the Radofin. And no doubt I am pronouncing all three of those names wrong. So let's just take a quick look around the machine itself. Off on switch, load program, game select and start. That almost makes me think that you turn the machine on, cartridge obviously goes in here. You need to load the cartridge, you then select your game because there's multiple options for games on each cartridge, and then you start it. The only other bit of interest really is on the back. Like a lot of these machines of the time, the controllers and the RF output are hardwired. This though, this is the bit that's missing, the AC adapter, a 4-pin DIN. So we'll have to break into this machine to try and figure out what voltages it's looking for. Given that it says AC adapter, is this looking for two different AC voltages coming into it? Or is there possibly a ground and three different DC voltages? As for the joysticks, well, they both have your typical of the era non-self-centering joystick. I don't know, maybe it's just me, maybe it's because I didn't grow up with this type of joystick, but I really dislike these. I find it really hard to control anything with these if the joystick is not self-centering. Presumably our two main fire buttons, and then you do have 12 other buttons laid out in sort of a keypad format. Who knows, maybe this is where the Atari Jaguar got the idea from. These buttons though, well, certainly the two main action buttons, or well, I'm assuming they're the main action buttons given the fact they're red, but they feel like micro switches. These ones, I'm not so sure, to be honest. They're nice and clicky. These ones, not so much. But maybe what we'll do is take one of these controllers apart. Well, I'll probably wind up taking them both apart anyway to give them a good clean. But it'll just be interesting to see what's inside here. But first things first, we need to figure out if this machine even works. Because I'm missing the power supply, we need to take it apart and try and figure out what the voltages it is looking for. So we've got 6 screws on the bottom. All of them so far have been golden colour. This one, for whatever reason, is black. Maybe this one has been replaced at some point. Can't get that one out. Right, let's see if it wants to come apart. And check that out. That just goes to further confirm what I was saying earlier. The labelling of this machine on its board says that it is a Radofin XM2050-F. And look at that, just beside that, 5 volt and 12 volt. And just taking a quick look up in there, well, the AC connector is at this point, and then there's 4 wires come from there up to this point on the board here. And that again is confirming 5 volt and 12 volt. So I'm wondering if we cut up an old Molex lead, could I use my little single Molex power supply to try and power this thing up? Let's see if we can get the actual board out. There's a selection of screws holding it. Well, it seems we're going to be limited as to how far we can remove this board from the case. Apart from all the wires that you can see there, which aren't going to disconnect without desoldering them, there's also this ribbon going to our switches and buttons on the front, those things. Let me see if I can find a screwdriver small enough to go in here to get these out. And then with that, we could at least lift the board, flip the board over out of the case. Let me try and do that. And we're in. But a couple of things. First of all, I said this machine was from the late 70s. And while the design of this was from 78, 79, and around that, this actual unit itself must have been from mid 1980. Looking at the date code on some of these components, well, there is one there from 39th week of 79, but the likes of this component here, that is from the 28th week of 1980. And I also thought that within our joysticks we maybe had micro switches, but given that on this panel, this is the power switch and the buttons on the front of the machine, well, it has those type of buttons. Sort of like your inverted bit of metal held in place by what I can only describe as sticky tape. That creates the button. I dare say inside our joysticks we'll find exactly the same thing. But we'll find out for certain later on when we take them apart. As for the machine itself, well, there is the power coming in, and our collection of diodes either side of those cables would make me think that yes, this is indeed an AC power supply feeding our 5 volt and 12 volt rails. As for the actual machine, well, it's based around these 2 chips here from Signetics. This is the 2650 microprocessor, 8-bit processor, and this is the 2636. This is the PIV, or Programmable Video Interface. In fact, I found a block diagram of this machine, and if we just take a quick look at that, well, we can see that the processor is looking for an 887 kilohertz clock So if I can find the pinout of this thing, we could check that out on our oscilloscope. That block diagram would suggest that our PIV here, it produces an RGB video signal. Although I think for the purposes of this machine, and given the extent of graphics that this could put out, I think a composite mod would be more than sufficient. There's various 7.4 series logic on the board. This chip here, labeled PE1X G8002, well, I can't find anything out about that from a Google search, but if I had to guess, I would say that this is our video encoder. There's our main system clock, the main crystal. That should be 8.86 megahertz, obviously divided down to give us our CPU clock, and in fact half of that, 4.43, that would be the PAL subcarrier, wouldn't it? Right, we're going to have to test this sooner or later, so let's just do it now, shall we? I have hooked up a Molex connector here, which is going to provide our 12 volt and 5 volts. I've hooked them up just at this point, and that is just beyond the power switch. You see, following, say, the 12 volt, comes in at this point here, through the diodes, down this big trace, out through the ribbon, to this point here on the switch. Obviously when you turn the machine on, make connectivity through to there, back down here, back through the ribbon again, and to that point. So that's where I have chosen to connect this off. Not actually sure if this will work or not. We may need to connect the 12 volt and the 5 volt further into the machine, because for example, meters in continuity, I stick that on there, and then see this trace here that is labeled 12 volt. Well, there's no continuity through to that. That 12 volt supply seems to come in here and down into a component at this position. It's the same story on the 5 volt as well, another component here. That's those two components there. Now you may think those are voltage regulators, but according to the part number 9401, and the footprint and labeling on the PCB itself, those are NPN transistors. In fact, I don't see any voltage regulation on this board per se, unless those transistors are indeed doing that. If anybody maybe knows, please let me know. But look, all we can do is try it. To avoid any potential risk to the chipset or to this, which I have labeled as the video encoder, since they're in sockets, let's just remove them. Right, the chips are out. Remove that one, which was in a socket as well. No time like the present. Hopefully this does not explode. You'd notice over here, an old hard drive sitting. I've just added that as a bit of extra load on my little Molex power supply. But here we go. So it's obviously working. The hard drive has spun up. Well, working as in the power supply is working. So this jumper here, that's a bit twisty looking, that is actually a ground. So we're going to test 5 volt, which is on this jumper here. But we're only getting 3.8. Could that be because of where I have connected the power off? Let me just turn this off. Could it be the case that this circuitry here is indeed providing some voltage regulation, but this machine is actually expecting a higher voltage to come into it? You know, is it maybe expecting like 9 volts, say, on the 5 volt rail coming in from the AC adapter, and then what we have here is bringing that down to 5 volts, whereas when we're just feeding 5 into it, this circuitry here is bringing that down further. Perhaps what we should do is disconnect these and make them off over here onto these two traces labeled 5 volt and 12. Okay, I have swapped those wires around. We are now directly onto the traces labeled 12 volt and 5 volt. Yep, just double checking that. Let's see if it works. Or well, let's see if we get the correct voltage this time out around the board. Let me just check between these two jumper wires. And we do indeed have our 5 volts. Where can I pick up 12 volt on this board? So if I am correct, and if this is indeed the video encoder, 12 volts should be on pin 10, which should be that pin there. Granted, my hand's in the way so you can't see that pin there. 6.7? Where is it getting 6 volts from? Did I just do what I think I just done? Did I just try and read that between 12 volt and 5 volt? That's ground there. Did I read that at that point? Yeah, that's more like it, isn't it? I was obviously reading that across the wrong point. Thankfully, I didn't fry anything in the process. So there indeed is our 12 volt supply on pin 10 of that chip. Hopefully confirming that that is indeed the video encoder as I thought it was. I wonder, do we have a clock signal? Although we may not get our 887 kilohertz clock over at the CPU here, because it seems our video encoder and the sync generator, whatever one of these chips does that, it seems that those are responsible for deriving that 887k clock. Or, well, certainly from looking at the block diagram anyway, that's how it seems. So I think the next thing we should do is just repopulate these chips, and then with our oscilloscope we'll have a look to see if those clock signals are indeed present. Right, chips are back in, scope is hooked up and ready to go. So let's switch the power on. And then if we take a look at the pinout for this CPU, pin 38 should be the clock signal. So let's see what we have. 40 pin dip, so pin 40 is up there, and 39 and 38. And there indeed is our clock signal. The frequency there, well, the scope is seeing it as 888.9 kilohertz. I think that's close enough. If we move back down this way a bit, there's the data bus. That doesn't seem to be doing very much, but perhaps that's because we don't have a cartridge installed and there's no ROM on this board. You know, there's no software here for the CPU to run. So let's do that. Let's stick our cartridge in. Let's see if there's any activity this time on the data bus. Yeah, that looks a bit better, doesn't it? Just try one of the other pins, and yeah, that looks good as well. So what about on the video encoder? Can we see a video signal? Well, composite output from this thing is on pin 8. And check that out, 15.63 kilohertz. I dare say that is a composite video signal. I think this is working. So let's see if we can't pick up that composite video signal. And we'll try to pick up sound as well. Get them into the video capture card and see if there's anything there. So rather than reinvent the wheel, searching around online, I found details of a composite mod for this very system. So this is a mod that was done by the Nightfall crew. I will link it in the video's description. Granted, they used a 22k adjustable resistor, whereas I've just stuck a solid resistor in here. There's one that we have to remove from that position to that position there, so runs across there on the other side of the board. I pulled that out. Then we've tapped video from there, that's a ground. We tap audio from over here, and I just picked up another ground back here for the audio cable. But rather than the 22k pot, which I don't have any, I had a bit of a play with various different types of resistors, and that is a 4.7k. It does work, although granted the video signal is a bit ropey. So that's about the quality of the image that we're getting so far. The characters there are nice and bright, but there is quite a bit of interference on the screen. One issue though is that I can't get it to do anything else. If I stick the game cartridge back in, well, you can see that it still gives us that same screen. If I try to press the load program button, this is our front panel, if you remember, that is this first button here, load program. So press that, but nothing happens. Equally, the other buttons do very little. So either there's something wrong with our cartridge, or there's something still wrong with the machine. This cartridge actually came from Sparks UK. Back when I first picked this up, we were talking about this machine over on Discord. Sparks said he had a game for it, so he just sent it to me. But granted, he didn't know if this actually worked. I'm leaning towards the problem may be in the cartridge. I have cleaned the edge connector. It was quite dirty, but cleaning it, it's spotless now, and it made no difference. I'm not convinced that there's a fault on our machine. So what I've done is I went ahead and ordered another game. And when it comes, well, at least that'll give us something to compare against. If both of them are faulty, well, odds on then, I would say it's the machine. Of course, the other possibility is that I'm missing something here with the power. While I have powered up the 5 volt and 12 volt rails, you know, is there something maybe before the voltage regulation side of this, or something even within that I've missed, something there that needs to be powered up to make the machine work. So I managed to find a genuine power supply. I have ordered it, but it's going to be at least a week before it gets here. And so with that in mind, I think we'll just draw a line under it for today. We have got the machine to the point where we've put power through it. We've seen something on the screen. There's still something wrong though. Could it be just a dodgy cartridge? Could there be a fault with the machine? Or could it be the way that I've wired it up? We'll come back to it when the spare game and the original power supply, when those arrive, then we can do some further testing. But that is it for now. So hopefully you enjoyed what you've seen. If you did, I would appreciate a big thumbs up. Why not hit subscribe if you haven't done so already. Still plenty more yet to come here on CRG, and I'll see you next time.